Gold down this Monday, a stark contrast from Friday when prices were within striking distance of $1,300 an ounce. So could the metal see more selling pressure? We're joined by someone who closely tracks the metals. Rick Rule, CEO of Sprott U.S. Holdings, joins us now. Rick, great to have you on. Thanks for joining us from Vancouver.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
So this is a completely different scenario from last week when many analysts I spoke to were convinced gold would hit $1,300. Where do prices go from here, Rick, and could we see more profit taking here?
Daniela, I'm still too old and wise to be tied down specifically to questions like that. I think the narrative around gold is probably constructive to going higher, but it always fakes you out. It would appear to me that the impetus, the narrative behind last week's rise was political turmoil, particularly the United States and Korea, when I think really the underlying reason that gold moves, at least in our markets, is the perceived strength of the US dollar. And I think it really will be economic news and confidence in the US dollar that takes gold materially higher. I think the narrative is always an excuse for people to do what they want to do rather than a fundamental. So could gold go higher? Yes. Could gold go lower? Yes. I realize that's not a helpful answer, but it's an honest one.
I know how much you hate forecasts, but I thought it was worth the shot. But I think, why investors are so frustrated is that this was the third time this year that gold fell before hitting that 1,300 level. So what is it with this level that gold just can't seem to close the deal here?
I think the problem is more with people's perception than it is with the metals market. I see the metals market in fairly good shape. We talked earlier in the year, you and I, about the fact that it's very rare that gold moves concurrently with the US dollar. In other words, when there was US dollar strength, gold going higher. My belief is that if the US dollar continues to soften, that gold would do very well. But if I've learned anything about gold in the last 40 years in the gold market, it is that if you watch it week by week, you go crazy and you get poor. If you think about the move in the gold price beginning, let's say, in the year 2000, gold has performed extremely well. When people have expectations for it on a weekly basis, they ignore reality and they damage their own purse.
So we looked at the hypotheticals of what would happen to gold, given the dollar movement. But what's your sentiment as where you think it's headed? Is more strength in store for the dollar, or will we see a softening?
I think we'll see a softening, and I think gold will do well, but perhaps not in the time frame that's suitable for most people. We forget that the narrative in the world is fairly constructive to gold. The on-balance sheet liabilities of the US government, the off-balance sheet liabilities of the US government, all of those sort of things, the debasement of the currency, all very useful for gold. People counter that by saying that interest rates are rising, as though gold can't do well in a rising interest rate environment. That forgets the era that I was brought up in, the 1970s, when the interest rate went up fourfold and the gold price escalated from $35 to $850. There are very odd so-called immutable laws that are mostly false, I think.
So what's your advice to investors then listening? I know you have a huge fan base in the gold community. What's your message to them, Rick?
Well, my own message is that I'm more comfortable owning gold than not owning gold, that you need to employ a realistic time frame. And by the way, the fact that gold itself has outpaced the gold stocks is probably useful for people who speculate in gold stocks as opposed to gold. The fact that the gold stock market is much weaker this year than it was going back to 2016 would seem to me, Daniela, to mean that some of the gold stocks are on sales, and sales are good.
I know. You've said this for a long time. You look forward to those dips to buy the mining stocks. So what's your sentiment going forward for the gold mining stocks?
I think selective gold mining stocks will do extremely well. You need to remember that gold stocks are, in fact, stocks. They represent fractional ownership in businesses. And you have to be extremely selective in this or any other market. But the fact that all of the gold sector, or almost all of the gold sector, the good, the bad, and the ugly, is off by 35 to 40%, says something about the attractiveness of some of the better issues around.
Rick Rule, thanks so much for your take on the gold market right now.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
And thanks for watching this edition of Kitco's Gold Report. We'll be back tomorrow.